Warm greetings from the High 10. It's Everyday Shenanigans. Today on Crime Vault, I will be discussing the murder of an Atlanta tech mogul by the name of Lance Herndon, who beat this successful man to death. Investigators followed the trail of the women in his life to find out. Atlanta tech mogul Lance Herndon's career, like the city he lived in, was humming in the late 1990s. He'd even been hailed by the Clinton administration as a rising entrepreneurial star. Herndon's bright star fell tragically on August 9, 1996. The 41-year-old computer consulting businessman was found bludgeoned to death in his bed at his upscale home in Roswell. Herndon's mother had called 911 after employees informed her that he hadn't showed up for work at his home office. Investigators told the Real Murders of Atlanta. Someone struck his forehead and top of his head with such force that there were streaks of blood droplets that were streaming down the wall, said Clint Rucker, former executive district attorney, Fulton County. No defensive wounds were on his hands, and little blood was found below the victim's waist. Our theory was that the killer climbed onto his naked body and straddled him, struck him in the head and face, causing his death. This detail would later figure into court documents. Investigators took stock of the crime scene where there was no sign of forced entry, as well as evidence that suggested the killer showered before leaving. 3 clocks in the bedroom had been unplugged, with one frozen at 4:10 a.m. Silver gum wrappers were found near the garage. Herndon's valuable laptop was missing, and a bedside picture of Herndon's current girlfriend, Kathy Collins, was face down. Detectives interviewed and cleared Collins, who'd been with another boyfriend when the murder occurred. She came off very genuine and she provided us with an alibi, said Tommy Williams, former police officer with the Roswell Police Department. Herndon's ex-wife, Janine Price, was also considered. Not only had they recently been divorced, but Lance had also had a $1 million life insurance policy that listed Janine as beneficiary. Investigators said Price provided an airtight alibi. The medical examiner studied the wounds and, based on an earlier case, concluded that an adjustable crescent wrench was used to kill Herndon. Detectives discovered that a 16-inch adjustable crescent wrench was missing from Herndon's workbench. Shortly before his murder, he used the wrench to put together exercise equipment. That made it readily accessible for the killer to use, said Williams. Police believe Herndon's violent murder may not have been premeditated, but was a crime of passion. An interview with Talana Caraway, who once dated the victim and now worked part-time for him, helped establish a window of time for the murder. She left work at his home office at 10:30 p.m. on August 9th. After she got home, the two talked on the phone until midnight. Detectives theorized that the crime occurred between 12 a.m. and 4:10 a.m., the time frozen on the unplugged bedroom clock. Caraway told officials she hadn't returned to Herndon's home and dropped the name Dionne Baugh. Baugh was attending Georgia State University when she met Herndon at his 41st birthday, which she finagled her way into through her work at the Metropolitan Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority. They began dating. He lavished Dionne with a lot of material goodies, said Rod Stotgill, author of Redbone, Money, Malice, and Murder in Atlanta. That included a shiny new Mercedes. Expensive gift-giving went with the self-image Herndon had cultivated. He positioned himself in town as kind of a black gay Gatsby, Stotgill told NPR. What Lance didn't realize was that Dionne Baugh was probably as much as a player as him, said the crime author. She didn't tell him she was married because her husband was away in Jamaica. She began seeing other men. Herndon was among Atlanta's most eligible catches. When authorities interviewed Baugh, she claimed that she and Herndon were madly in love, said Rucker. She also said she had told her husband, Sean Nelson, a Jamaican resident and Air Jamaica pilot, that Herndon was just a mentor. But the expensive car indicated otherwise, and Nelson knew of the affair. But at the time of the murder, he was back in Jamaica, clearing him from suspicion. Detectives turned their focus to Baugh, whose relationship with Herndon was tumultuous because he saw other women. A month before the murder, she'd come to his home and saw Collins there. Baugh banged on the door so aggressively, Herndon called 911. She was arrested and charged with a misdemeanor of criminal trespassing. That criminal case was scheduled to go to court on the day Herndon's body was discovered, said Rucker. Could she have killed him to prevent him from testifying against her in court? Investigators scrutinized Baugh's account of the night of the murder. She claimed that Herndon had come to her home in Norcross between 9 and 10:30 p.m. to loan her his laptop. That timeline contradicted Caraway's account. Detectives were convinced that Baugh was behind Herndon's murder, but a lack of forensic evidence kept them from connecting her to the crime. 18 months passed with no leads. But in 1998, a tip from Sean Nelson, who was divorcing Baugh, cracked things wide open. Nelson claimed that in the throes of an argument months earlier, he questioned if she had anything to do with Herndon's death, and Baugh turned violent. She threatened to kill him, just like she did Lance, Rucker told producers. Baugh's sworn statements in divorce court about Herndon that contradicted what she told homicide investigators came back to haunt her. In this case, she swore that she and Herndon were just friends, a complete 180-degree turn. Baugh also said that on that night of August 9th, she'd gone to Herndon's home to pick up the laptop. The statement contradicted what she told homicide investigators 2 years earlier and put her at the scene of a crime. I'm going to stop there and play the commentary to show you, indeed, who killed Lance Herndon. Thank you for joining me.
I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Lance Herndon.
Lance Herndon was young. He was attractive. He was an entrepreneur.
Lance had 3 different girlfriends at the same time. No lack of suspects. They found him in his bed, and his skull was caved in.
I mean, I think every bone in his face was broken.
Lance Herndon was a 41-year-old entrepreneur and prominent figure in Atlanta. He was recognized for his business achievements in the African-American community by countless Georgia-based organizations, as well as the George H. Bush and Bill Clinton administrations. But all that success came to a tragic end when he was found bludgeoned to death in his suburban Atlanta mansion on the morning of August 8, 1996. His family, friends, and neighbors were all shocked. No one could figure out who would do this to Lance Herndon and why.
Drinking water before bed burns 46...
Sorry about that. Commercial break. Got to get the money in.
No one could figure out who would do this to Lance Herndon and why.
In the mid-90s, Atlanta was the place to be. Everyone wanted to be here, specifically if you were a Black American in the South. The Olympics was happening. It was making Atlanta seem like an international city. This was a place where you felt like you could come and live your dreams.
I wanted to write about the new Atlanta. I wanted to write about Black people who are creating a nouveau riche, really. And so I wanted to write a cautionary tale about a Gatsby-esque figure who shows up in Atlanta and sort of pays a big price for sort of flying too close to the sun.
Lance Herndon was a very interesting person. He was a who's who in Black Atlanta. He had achieved a great deal of success professionally.
So Lance Herndon was cited by a couple of administrations, the Bush administration, the first Bush administration, as well as the Clinton administration, for his entrepreneurship. His company, Access Inc., was one of the fastest growing computer technology companies in the Southeast.
He was young. He was attractive. He was an entrepreneur. He had a very nice home. He had lots of cars. He lived his life to the fullest.
Lance Herndon was a charming, charming guy. Everybody liked Lance Herndon. You know, women, men. He was kind of a flirt. He really was the sort of guy that everyone wanted to know. So Lance Herndon kept his office in his home. And so he had workers in the home. They didn't have access to the living quarters, but they had access to the office suite. One sort of custom of his was that he would dictate directions to his employees on a tape recorder. He would do it routinely. And so on this morning, those tapes weren't there, and it set off some alarms for the staff. And so they called his mom. She came over and she went upstairs, and that's when they heard this scream.
For Lance Herndon's mother, it was a horrifying discovery. Her 41-year-old son was lying bleeding in his bed. Mrs. Herndon made a frantic call to 911.
Emergency, somebody just killed my baby. Okay, where's your baby? Okay, tell me what's going on. I don't know. I came in the house. He's 20 years old. I found him in the bed.
She called 911. When they arrived, they found him in his bed with his arms sort of crossed over him, and he was nude, and his skull was bludgeoned and caved in.
The garage door was partially open, but there was no sign of forced entry, no sign of robbery. Police said a highly respected businessman suffered blood trauma to the head.
Right now, there was no weapon located at the scene. The investigators interviewed neighbors and conducted a search of the area for evidence.
There were no signs of any forced entry to the home, and on first glance, there was nothing taken from the home. And so at the time that he was discovered by family members, it was a real whodunit.
But it was clear that it was a crime of passion. That's what they felt like. Whoever had done this knew him. There was a picture of one of his girlfriends, Kathy Collins, on one of the dressers, and the face of it was turned down. She was kind of in a teddy, and it was an intimate photograph. It definitely raised questions about who put the picture face down, right? Why didn't they want to see that?
The police had conducted interviews of many people, but fundamentally, there was no smoking gun, and there was no arrow that really pointed to a person who was responsible.
With Jackie Herndon by his side this morning, Mayor Bill Campbell said he hopes offering a $12,000 reward will shake loose a lead and eventually an arrest.
This is a very difficult and gruesome murder for all of us.
Lance had 3 different girlfriends at the same time, and it was just a chaotic scene where 2 or 3 women would be at the house on the same night. And I think most people would agree it is just not possible to sustain that type of a lifestyle. At the same time, he had people that were very angry with him about business dealings. He owed money. He had recently had several confrontations about money. He had financial problems. He probably had debts that nobody didn't know about. So there were plenty of people who might very well have wanted Lance Herndon dead. No lack of suspects.
As Roswell police investigate the crime, Fulton County deputies stand guard in front of the home. The Herndon family has hired more protection because at this point, they still don't have a clue about who murdered 41-year-old Lance Herndon.
I think that people were very surprised in the community that Lance lived in. It was relatively quiet. It was wealthy. They certainly did not see a lot of homicides.
There was a sense that this Roswell Police Department may have been a little over its head.
When the Roswell Police Department brought their case to the Fulton County District Attorney's Office for assistance, there wasn't a whole lot there.
Well, it wasn't really until the Georgia Bureau investigation kind of moved in that it just got that sense that, look, we have this now, let the big boys handle it.
There were no fingerprints. It apparently had been wiped out, but that was enough for them to be very suspicious of her.
No time of death and no motive. What they do have is a long list of possible suspects. They begin their investigation by interviewing his inner circle, which consists mainly of women with whom he's intimate.
I got a huge payout after a car accident.
Sorry about that.
In a homicide case like this, the police look at all persons in his inner circle, and certainly the recent divorce between Janine and Lance was something that they looked at very carefully.
So the first suspect would have naturally been his ex-wife, Janine Herndon. She actually was dating someone at the time. She was able to prove her whereabouts, and they quickly dismissed that.
Talana Caraway was an old girlfriend of Lance Herndon, who at the time of his death worked in a part-time basis as a receptionist in his home office. They were generally known to be very good friends. They shared lots of personal details with each other.
She actually went to Lance's house that night, but it was at a time that was incompatible with the time of death. So she was more or less excluded because of the timeline.
The third suspect probably would have been Kathy Collins. That was his kind of girlfriend, the woman that he was seen with the most publicly. She had clothes at his home. They traveled together. I think he viewed her as someone that he might develop a longer term relationship with.
Kathy Collins, who we refer to as Miss Hollywood, she presented like some Hollywood starlet. Kathy Collins was at a restaurant near Lance's house with her niece, and apparently had stayed at that restaurant for several hours on the night Lance was killed. We thought it strange that she was so near the scene, and when I looked at her bill from the restaurant, it was only a few dollars.
Norvell Harris, as I understand it, was a business associate of Lance Herndon's, who at the time had some complaints and some disputes about financial issues between the two of them.
He had made some threat, allegedly, that he would get back at Lance.
And then Dionne Baugh, who was his mistress, really. He was seeing her, he had been seeing her for a while, had been lavishing her with gifts, and she was married.
Dionne Baugh was a beautiful young woman. She worked at MARTA, which is the transit system here in Atlanta, and she was also a student. She went to Georgia State University. She was working. Lance Herndon walked in one day to the MARTA offices, and that presumably is when they saw each other. She would later learn that he was having a birthday party.
She had really finagled her way to get invited to his birthday party, which would have been in April of that same year, about 4 months roughly before his death. And over the course of those 4 months, they developed a physical, mostly, relationship.
Well, he'd give me money every week. He'd pay for my school fee, and he basically gave me a credit card too.
He quickly puts her in beyond a good life. He gives her a credit card. He gives her a Mercedes. They had a pretty strong relationship. And at some point, I think he just wasn't doing as well financially. And I don't know how many girlfriends he had. He probably had several. But he decided to cut back. And he basically asked her for his car back and the credit card back.
What can $50 do? That's not true. Sometimes it would be 700, sometimes it would be 500. Sometimes.
Every week.
I'm embarrassed.
That's okay.
I hope it's not on camera.
Her husband, Sean Nelson, who lived in Jamaica, did in fact find out that his wife was cheating on him. There was a moment where Sean actually called Lance on the phone and confronted him. And that became kind of something that they ginned up as evidence as well, that Sean had maybe flown in and killed him and gotten back on a flight.
So the police had the task of narrowing down these suspects, and they eventually came to focus on Dionne as the primary suspect for several reasons that are all circumstantial.
But I think he probably went to his house because we have proof that he was at his house. There's no way he did it.
But I never, do I need to get him checked?
The police did not have a good case against Dionne Baugh at all, but they did manage to find a single hair from Dionne on his body, another one in the bed. There was some skin under his fingernails. Now, none of that really meant a whole lot because, I mean, she was having sex with him.
The police had no evidence that Dionne was on the scene that night. I mean, obviously there was the DNA, but that's not time specific. So the DNA of a lover in the other lover's bed is not compelling evidence of when she was there.
You left work, went to school, did what George said, till 6 o'clock, then went up to North Cross, picked up your ex-husband or your husband and daughter, you spent the house there, and went to Hartsfield. So about 8 o'clock, you drive back from Hartsfield, and you call Lance.
No, because I didn't drive right back, I didn't come right back from the airport. I stayed there until they got on the plane, and then I came back.
Dionne Baugh claimed at the time, she was interviewed by police, that she was actually at home on the night that Lance Herndon was actually murdered. But she also contended that Lance Herndon had come to her home about 9:30 in the evening to bring her a laptop computer for her to use to do schoolwork. He only stayed for a few minutes, and then he left and returned to his home.
I've gone over it in my mind so many times. I wish I'd let him stay with me. I wish I'd let him stay with me.
Did you want to?
Yeah, but I don't know. I just dropped my daughter at the airport, and I was just kind of depressed. I didn't want to be bothered with anybody. I just wanted to be there by myself.
There wasn't an eyewitness at all putting her there. There were no fingerprints. It apparently had been wiped down. I don't think they found any fingerprints. But that was enough for them to be very suspicious of her.
The big break in the case was when I got a phone call from a lawyer here in town. We learned some very interesting and damaging evidence.
All right. Quick intermission break. Thank you all for joining me. This is Everyday Shenanigans.
With no hard evidence tying Dionne Baugh to the murder, detectives focused on her claim that Lance himself brought a laptop computer to her home on the evening he was killed.
Did you know he was coming?
Did I know he was coming? Yeah. Yeah, because he told me that, if you're going to come over here, I'll stop by there. And I said, well, no, we don't feel like any company. And he said, well, I'm coming anyway. And I said, well, okay, when you come and bring the computer then. And that's when he brought the computer.
Just on the mini computer you had at school?
Yeah. I have a computer, but I loaned it to my aunt, so I needed one in the house, and I didn't feel like going back to the office. I told him to bring the portable one.
Did the computer have the case over to it?
No.
Nothing?
No. He just gave it to me just like that.
Lance could be really fastidious. He was a guy who never let his laptop computer leave without the bag. And so that computer was found at Dionne Baugh's home in a closet without the bag. So the case started to turn on when the computer left that office and wound up at her home.
Right now, there's about 4 people that swear that he was at his house working in his office until 10:30.
I don't know what what to tell you. I know he came over there, he gave me the computer, and he gave me the credit card, and then he left.
They thought they had to lie with the laptop. It looked pretty strong that there was a lie. Still wasn't a lot of evidence about when he delivered the laptop, but it was something. And it was the forensic evidence they had. I think their biggest view on that was Lance Herndon was supposedly so meticulous with his cleanliness that he wouldn't have her skin under his fingernails unless he had had sex with her that night or that day, and he wouldn't have had one of her hairs on his body, probably not even one in the bed.
This was a guy who also wouldn't even eat spare ribs with his hands, you know? I mean, he ate it with a fork, right? This is a guy who showered 3 or 4 times a day.
There were just certain things that were present in, on, and around his body that would not be expected to be there when you understand he was a person who washed his hands consistently, for instance. The big break in the case was when I got a phone call from a lawyer here in town who represented Sean Nelson, who was the husband of Dionne Baugh, that indicated to me that Sean wanted to give me some information about my case. Sean Nelson and Dionne Baugh were in the midst of a very contentious divorce here in Metro Atlanta. I had a chance to speak with Mr. Nelson and his lawyer and Mr. Nelson's mother, who had traveled here from Jamaica for the purposes of the divorce trial. And it was during that meeting that we learned some very, very, very interesting and damaging evidence against Ms. Baugh.
Dionne told the police that she had not been to Lance's house the night he was killed, but Dionne's mother-in-law later told police, no, Dionne told me that she was at the house. So the way the state prioritizes that is that's our break. And now we know that she was there, and this contradicts everything else she's told us, and therefore she must be guilty. That statement from the mother-in-law is what actually got the trial going.
Mr. Nelson described for us an argument that he had with Dionne Baugh, and ultimately that argument led her to say something to the effect of, if you keep messing with me, Sean, I'm gonna beat you upside the head the same way I did Lance.
One of the elements of this story is that she could be really jealous. And there was a moment in which she come by and she looked through the window because Lance didn't answer the door, and Dionne saw Kathy Collins in the house, and Kathy had a nightgown on. And Lance, very cowardly, did not answer the door. Instead, he called the cops. But in the end, they arrested her because she didn't leave. So the next day, she was supposed to go to court, and Lance was supposed to go and sort of get her off, to sort of say, big misunderstanding, and his calendar was always tight, and there was nothing on his calendar. So the thought is that she slept with him that night, he went to sleep, she went downstairs and saw that her case, which was coming up the following morning, was not on his calendar, and she was livid.
The state had evidence, obviously, of a motive because it appeared that Lance was losing interest in her. The state had some evidence of DNA. They had evidence that she'd been at the house that night. So clearly it was proximity, it was opportunity, and there was motive. And often that's all the prosecution needs to go forward.
We're ready to go, Mr. Rucker. You ready to? Okay, go right ahead.
So it's all circumstantial, and Clint Rucker has one significant problem, and that is the murder weapon.
What was the murder weapon? Indeed. Thank you for joining me. Everyday Shenanigans.
on evidence, and the evidence they did have was all circumstantial. For a savvy young assistant district attorney, it was the perfect challenge.
We're ready to go, Mr. Rucker. You're ready to, okay, go right ahead. I have been given the responsibility of presenting to you the case of the state versus Mrs. Dionne Andrea Baugh. The evidence will show you that on August 28th, Ms. Baugh was very angry. She confronted Mr. Herndon, and she killed him.
Clint Rucker had that rare combination of really great street sense and intuition with kind of a real knowledge of the law and how to blend that in extraordinary ways with very little evidence at times.
One of the things that you will not hear from in this case is an eyewitness. There were no eyewitnesses to this crime. And although the investigation in this case was thorough and it was exhaustive, you will not see the murder weapon. The police were not able to recover it. It will be the inconsistent words of the defendant and the inconsistent actions of the defendant that will prove her guilt beyond a reasonable doubt.
This woman has been laboring under these accusations, under these innuendos, for 6 years of her life. And to this day, the state cannot tell you a time of death for Lance. They cannot tell you a murder weapon that killed Lance. They have no fingerprints of my client. They have no blood evidence related to my client.
The defense pushed back by saying, look, Lance Herndon absolutely was a man about town. But within that, there were a lot of people that didn't like him. He had a lot of money floating around and debts that he owed. The Dionne Baugh would have been the only woman who was scorned. I mean, that Lance Herndon kind of had a mark on him.
They don't know if Lance Herndon was murdered by one of his other girlfriends, and I'll tell you that by a jealous husband of any number of women he was dating. Whether he was killed by somebody that was mad at him in conjunction with his business, in conjunction with his nightclub, in conjunction with his loans. They don't know.
I wanted the jury to see that there's no real reason to believe that this one lady did it, Dionne Baugh, compared to the 3 or 4 other lovers and the bad business dealings. Why is it that the state is so convinced that she did it in the absence of any real direct evidence?
As you step on into the room there, you see the victim lay there. You can really see that he had been bludgeoned very severely. The blood spatter on the wall showed that he had been struck numerous times.
The first blow was to the back of the head. He was sitting on the bed. That blow it by itself, if it came down hard enough, would have killed him, because that's the softest part of the skull. But after that, she just battered his face at least 10, 12 times with blows that pretty much devastated it and made it, very personal.
How did you set up the interview of Ms. Baugh on the 17th?
We called her and asked her to come to the office to talk to us.
Did she agree to do so?
Yes, sir.
If I'd known I was going to go on camera, I look better.
Oh, that's good. At that time, who were suspects?
There were several. I mean, the people who were within his life.
Okay. Hadn't ruled anybody out yet?
No.
It seems to me that we found out, that he was seeing all kinds of young ladies. He had a lot going on. And I was kind of curious, why you would put up with that. Why did you stay with him when he was cheating on you?
Because I didn't know. The one time when I went, the one time I saw that girl in there,
that one I just kind of dismissed. But then when I got arrested, I got upset. I said, obviously there was something going on. He needed to terminate this relationship right here and now. And he swore to me that he told me so many different stories. I really don't know which one to believe, to be honest with you, even till today.
When they played the police interview with her, the court was very quiet. Is obviously in that interview, she comes across as someone who felt very jilted by Lance and very wronged by Lance.
Do you know that you still have a relationship?
What relationship?
With you? Did you find one?
No, I was the one who told him that I wanted out of the relationship.
Well, the other side of the coin was he was the one who wanted that in the relationship to take the car.
Who said that?
Well, there's tapes and sides people.
So he was going to terminate the relationship with me.
I can't imagine it not having an impact on the jury at that time.
Of the questioned head hair, the 5 that you recovered from the victim's body in the medical examiner, were you able to get a match from those head hairs?
There were 2 head hairs that could have originated from Dionne Baugh, 3 head hairs that were consistent with Lance Herndon.
Of course, there was evidence that linked her to the house. They were lovers. She spent a lot of time at the house.
You just have 2 hairs and a little bit of skin among 2 people who were sexually involved with each other. Doesn't seem like a lot of evidence.
In fact, you can't testify as to how long the pubic hairs of Ms. Baugh and your head hairs of Ms. Baugh attended, can you?
No, I cannot.
What complicated the DNA evidence was that Lance Herndon was quite the playboy. And so there were a lot of women in and out of his bedroom.
Now, were any hairs that were found that, in fact, actually excluded my client?
There were 2 head hairs from the tape list that did not match the known head hair of Dionne Baugh. There were also 3 pubic hairs from the victim's right side that did not match Dionne Baugh.
So it's all circumstantial. And Clint Rucker has one significant problem, and that is the murder weapon.
During the course of the investigation, we discovered that the murder weapon was a crescent wrench, much like this one.
This wrench, or something similar to it, is the closest thing of all, because it has characteristics that satisfy the injury patterns on his face and head.
The medical examiner was able to talk to the jurors and explain how even these striated toggles left marks on the face of Lance Herndon that were consistent with the wrench when we laid it down against the photographs. It was really just phenomenal testimony about how Mr. Herndon was killed.
Clint Rucker, it looked like he himself could put the entire case into jeopardy. It was a huge deal.
Clint Rucker, drama with the defense attorney. Thank you for joining me. This is Everyday Shenanigans. If you want to donate to the channel, $ Big Angie, 129 Cash App. All super chats are welcome during this live. Thank you for joining me.
The state's case clung to 2 hairs of DNA and a potential murder weapon. Would it be enough to convince a jury of Dionne Baugh's guilt? Assistant DA Clint Rucker believed it would, but William Quinn and the defense were not going down without a fight.
The state has to put a dagger through her heart by showing that she killed somebody. Now, where is the evidence that she's killed someone? Where is the evidence of any bad feeling on her part for Lance Herndon? If they cannot find a murder weapon, so they buy a murder weapon. They thought they had a case because there was a pubic hair. And they thought they had a case because there was a head hair. When the medical examiner says those hairs could have been there from sex and could have been there for days, then how could you ever convict somebody of murder from those hairs? If there's any reasonable explanation other than her guilt, it's your job. It's your job to find her not guilty.
For a lot of people, your verdict will bring a sense of closure. You will finally And this is what this defendant did to me. It is not right.
Basically, it was a weak case on evidence. They had a strong prosecutor because the prosecutor made a very compelling closing argument.
Convict this defendant of each and every count in the state's bill of indictment. Do not let her escape. I didn't feel like it was a slam dunk in this case. I was anxious about it, but I certainly felt like I had done the best that I could do.
We publish the verdict. Yes, sir. We, the jury, find the defendant, Dionne Baugh, guilty of murder.
Dramatic win, maybe undercut by a dramatic misstep by the prosecutor after he won his conviction. It looked like he himself had put the entire case into jeopardy.
Mr. Quinn, you explained the motion for mistrial based on what factors?
One motion for mistrial was the prosecutor, in the middle of the case, it was determined that he was not in good standing with the state bar.
Clint Rucker had neglected to pay his membership dues to the bar. It was a huge deal.
Mr. Rucker, you will admit, once you did it, at the time we started this trial, you were not in good standing with the state bar.
Yes, that appears to be the case.
There is law that says that if the prosecutor is not licensed, then the whole formality is wasted. The trial is wasted. The defendant is entitled to be tried by a member of the bar.
I expect him to play by the same rule I do, and when you don't play by the rules, there's consequences. The consequence in this case is a mistrial.
The judge, he didn't throw the case out.
I'm going to allow the jury verdict to stand, and we're ready for sentencing in the case.
Ultimately, the law allows for the prosecution of a case, even though the administrative fees have not been paid. And so we quickly rectified that. And of course, the judge ruled correctly.
The court sentences life imprisonment in the malice murder conviction.
Dionne Baugh was sentenced to life in prison, and off she went. And the family and I, along with the community, believed that the case was closed until a very, very good lawyer was hired to handle her appeal before the Supreme Court here in Georgia.
We got involved in the Dionne Baugh case originally right after the first trial when she was in jail, and we did the appeal. It was actually an evidentiary error which led to the reversal of the first conviction. It was the use of hearsay in that a police officer was allowed to testify to what everybody told him.
But she was parked in her car.
Yeah, this is all hearsay. Somebody told him where people parked. I want to hear from the people where they parked, not from the police officer.
I was about to have a stroke objecting. I think I objected to that like 21 times.
It's hearsay, and there's another thing I want to object to.
This is improper bolstering with hearsay, and the Supreme Court agreed with that position.
For the second trial, Dionne Baugh just came loaded up. They attacked his character, tried to paint him as a cad.
I got a note just a few minutes ago.
Thank you for joining me. Case of Lance Herndon murdered in Atlanta, Georgia.
Began in October of 2003, 7 years after Lance Herndon was found bludgeoned to death in his Roswell, Georgia mansion. Clint Rucker once again would lead the prosecution, but Ms. Baugh had a new defense team, and they were all stars.
I speak for Dionne Baugh. I, along with Dionne Samuel, have the privilege of representing her. She's charged with murder, felony murder, and she's charged with stealing a computer and credit card. You know that. Two of those charges. Her was. She says, I didn't kill it. I didn't steal it. I'm not guilty.
For the second trial, Dionne Baugh just came loaded up. She had a couple of fantastic lawyers in Don Samuel and Tony Axon, and she just was able to start to put together a very, very compelling case that she hoped could get her off.
Lance Herndon, of 41 years old, had been recently divorced in January of 1996. This is his third marriage, and she will report his divorce because of infidelity. He is having a relationship with other women while he's married, and that is only a tip of the iceberg.
The second go round, the defense focused a lot more on the character of Mr. Herndon. They attacked his character repeatedly, trying to paint him as a cad, a womanizer, in that manner, kind of suggesting that maybe he got a little bit of what he deserved.
The strategy of the second trial wasn't terribly different than the strategy of the first trial. It remained a circumstantial case. The prosecution's case did not improve over time. The prosecution was still going with motive, opportunity, and some physical evidence that may trip the ass.
Before you can return a verdict, the state has to prove, beyond a reasonable doubt, that they have proven their case, that the defendant is guilty. I will submit to you, when you consider the evidence in this case, when you consider the lack of evidence, and when you consider contradictions in the evidence, that they have not even met the preponderance standard. They have not even proved that it's more likely than not.
And what I want to do is I want to introduce you to Mr. Lance Herndon.
The state's case really required the jury to forfeit the beyond reasonable doubt standard and just say it had to be her because we haven't seen any good alternatives.
I got a note just a few minutes ago, and it says Judge Baxter, the jury is hopelessly deadlocked, signed by the foreperson, and I'm gonna bring them out, declare a mistrial, and I guess we'll start over.
They were not going to get a conviction. It was not going to be a unanimous verdict. And Judge Baxter said, okay, forget it. We'll start over again. I think most defense lawyers would tell you if the client walks out of the courtroom the same door that you walk out of, it's a win. Of course, the downside is you got to start trial number 3.
I was prepared to go back to trial a third time until the untimely death of Special Agent Sam House from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. He was the person who processed the Lance Herndon crime scene. The testimony that he provided could only have been provided by him. And so with his death, we were automatically put in a position that led us to conclude that we would have to compromise and make some offer in the case, something that would perhaps hold her accountable with a sentence that was less than a life sentence.
She knew her life wasn't coming to an end, and she made, I think, a rational decision, whether she's guilty or not. I'm not a judge. She said, I'm willing to accept that offer and put this behind us.
So I'm going to accept the plea and present to you according to the recommendation, the agreement between the parties in this case.
After 8 years, Dionne Baugh admits to the judge for the first time that she killed her former boyfriend, prominent Roswell businessman Lance Herndon.
Mr. Herndon's family were in agreement with us to resolve the case in this manner. Quite frankly, Jackie Herndon, Lance Herndon's mother, was emotionally worn out. She took a plea of guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter and received a 10-year sentence.
I'm just glad for it. There's no closure, but at least it's ended.
In 2011, when Dionne was released from prison, I attempted to find her. I was not successful. I did manage to find one of Dionne's relatives who spoke with me on a condition of anonymity. And this relative indicated that while they did not know where Dionne was and had not spoken to her in quite some time, they said that they hoped that with Dionne's release and her moving on, that both families would be able to find some peace.
So when I think about this case, I think about a card that Harrison Herndon, Lance's son, who was about 4 years old when his dad was murdered, and that was a little card that said, "Hey, Dad, I miss making donuts with you." And then I think about the crime scene photographs. No person should ever have to die like that. Whoever did this should pay. And 7 years, if in fact she did it, that ain't enough for what happened in that bedroom and the way she left his skull just shattered. And so many lives shattered as well.
Dionne Baugh has maintained a low profile since her release from prison in July of 2011. She's managed to avoid the media, and as of this taping, her whereabouts are unknown. I'm Tamron Hall. Thank you for watching Someone They Knew.
Thank you so very much, everybody. Courtesy Court TV. I will now chop up the said situation pertaining to Lance Herndon, an entrepreneur, well-to-do African-American male who was bludgeoned in his own bed in the late summer of 1996. There were many suspects. The police were trying to decide who killed Mr. Lance. He was said to be a man around town, a very subtle way of saying he was sleeping with a lot of women. They didn't even know how many women there were. They named at least 4 in this said commentary that he had slept with. Very, very baffling situation. Where is Dionne Baugh? As you've heard at the end of this commentary, she has kept a low profile and nobody knows where she is. I will bring you a little bit of information pertaining to Dionne Baugh. Thank you so much for joining me. This is Everyday Shenanigans. What was her motive? Why did she finally take the plea that she killed this man? Was it because he took back the car, the credit cards? He wasn't going to show up to the court hearing where she had trespassed on his property? Did she go down there and peep inside of his itinerary to see that he wasn't going to go to court? Did they even talk about it? Did she ask him, hey, are you going to go to court? Hey, are you going to not go to court? Are you going to drop the charges? What? Did she go there deliberately to kill him that night? Because maybe they had talked and he said, I'm going to press charges anyway. So when you think about that, how did she get in? Broke in, he let her in, what? You have all this information about what was found in the bed as far as hairs. Was there ever a conversation between Mr. Lance Herndon and Dionne Baugh about him showing up to court? One would have to ask. She's never going to tell it because most defendants don't testify at their own trials because they tell you, best you be quiet. Let your lawyers do the dirty work for you. And in the end, it is the burden of the state to prove the guilt of the suspect. Wiki.ng is the source of this information. Dionne Baugh, where is she now today? Ex-husband and daughter Lance Herndon killed. I do not have a date of this said information. It was the latest that I was able to pull up in the Google search. Dionne Baugh, Jamaican immigrant, was building a life in Atlanta, Georgia. Things were going well with her recent divorce. Dionne had a well-paying job, and as most of you heard in the commentary, she worked for MARTA, which is the Atlanta, Georgia transit system. Dionne, on the other hand, she had a well-paying job, a wealthy boyfriend. Lance Herndon, a local businessman, had noticed her, and the two started dating. Dionne, on the other hand, was a ladies' man, and Lance had caught him with another woman on at least one occasion. Dionne had caught him with another woman. She was detained for causing a commotion outside his house. And you also heard that in the commentary. She was banging on his door, and he would not let her in, did not acknowledge her while having another woman inside of the house because Dionne peeped through the windows, saw him with another woman, so he cowardly called the police instead of confronting her directly. Dionne, who admitted to seeing Lance the night before but claimed she did not know about the murder, was apprehended by police. Dionne's DNA would link her to the crime site, proving her innocence. She was charged with murder by the police. She was convicted, but a new trial was ordered due to contested testimony. Meanwhile, the second jury was deadlocked, giving Dionne a third trial opportunity. Dionne decided to make a deal. She was sentenced to 10 years in jail after pleading guilty to voluntary manslaughter. According to some sources, Dionne Baugh has remained in Georgia following her release. Others believe she has since traveled about, living in Florida, Kansas for short periods. However, one thing is certain. The Jamaican immigrant maintains a low profile these days and does not appear to want any media attention focused on her. In terms of her marriage, Dionne was in the middle of a divorce when she was arrested in 1998. As a result, it's fair to presume that the relationship is also over. Dionne Baugh's ex-husband is Sean Nelson, a pilot for Air Jamaica. In 1992, Dionne and Sean welcomed their first and only daughter into this world, Amanda. Unfortunately, their relationship began to fall apart soon after. Dionne was dissatisfied with her suburban life and Sean's business, which required him to travel for significant periods. Dionne began to seek comfort in other men, which led her to Lance Herndon. Later, Sean returned to the island nation with his daughter after discovering what was going on. Dionne Baugh is no longer in jail or prison. For the voluntary manslaughter of Roswell millionaire Lance Herndon, Baugh served 10 years in prison. She also consented to serve an extra 10 years of probation. Dionne was released in 2011 after serving time in a state correctional prison. If you need verification for the information, the Queen has brought you wiki.ng is the source. So you hear this story of a woman, young woman. She was a student at the time and also working for MARTA in Atlanta, Georgia. She was married at the time, one daughter who is now an adult. Unhappy, seeking the attention and comfort of another man, other men. The husband finds out, goes back to the islands with the daughter, assumingly. What happened between this woman? Did she vigorously attach herself to Mr. Lance? It seems that's what's been said. She made her way into his birthday party. She must have had her eye on him. Maybe people were talking about him. She heard things about him. Atlanta is not as big as people think, and that's what's been told to me. People talk. As they said in this commentary, he was a man around town, meaning he liked women, had several women, married 3 times. I believe January 96 was the last time, if I'm not mistaken. But what's sickening is he died months later, bludgeoned to death in his own bed in August 1996. We come to find out that Miss Dionne Baugh is the culprit, that the detectives are naming as the suspect. Bed hairs, pubic hairs in the bed. What's the motive? Many women. Why did she kill him? It is said in the commentary he was bludgeoned 10 to 12 times in the head. So what happened? Did she crawl on top of him, pretend to be enthralled and making love, and instead beat the man to death? Was he asleep at the time? Make it make sense. Because if there are no defensive wounds, then that means he was possibly asleep. So possibly he invited her over. But she did not really go there to just have sex. Or did she go in good standing to have sex, to be close to him? And then the conversation came up about the court hearing for the next day. Could he have been so cold and callous to invite her over for sex, but then say in the same breath, I'm still going to take you to court and I'm still going to have you prosecuted for trespassing? Who's to say? Because that, as most of you know, a dead man tells no tales. There's also been reported that tapes were missing. That's what led the office staff to call the mother, his mother. And she's the one who discovered his body. He was meticulous. He recorded everything. Even what he wanted the staff to do as far as business task, he made tapes. And that next morning they were missing when the staff came in to start work. Why did Dionne Baugh kill this man? When you listen to the interrogation, you hear her saying that she didn't know he had other women. Was that true? Did she not know of other women? Was she really shocked, or did she play the role? Of course, she admitted to the one woman where, she peeked through the window and saw him in there with that lady, banging on the door, blah, blah, blah. God knows what she was probably saying, probably cussing and fussing with, which many women probably would do. They're upset. He's in there with somebody else. And what's the time frame with that incident with the woman inside of the house where she peeked through the window? How close in proximity was it to the murder? Very interesting. The detectives felt that she was jilted. They said that's how she came across in the interrogation. Naturally, they only give you bits and pieces of the interrogation. Was she jilted? Did she feel jilted by him in that interrogation? Did she come across that way? Or was that their interpretation of her? Because of the information they gathered from he said, she said, and possibly Mr. Lance may have had a diary. People who record things probably also write things down. Did he write in his own writing, hey, she's a problem, I gotta get rid of her? And as you hear, they are telling her he was tired of you. He wanted somebody else, and she played the role. Or did she not? Oh, he's tired of me? Where'd you get that from? And they basically told her, people talk. We know. So who are the people that told it? Did he tell other people that he was tired of being with her? She was costing him too much money. He did give her money. You hear her joking about that in interrogation. She's smiling and giggly, which I thought was very inappropriate when you're talking about a dead person. Why are you laughing and giggling and talking about, I wish I had known the cameras would be here, blah, blah, blah. I would have dressed better. Who talks like that during an interrogation of somebody you've been sleeping with and they're now bludgeoned to death? And at one point she does mention, oh, do I need to get a lawyer? Because that's what happens in interrogation. Sometimes it starts off real smooth and easy. And then they bring the bang. No, you weren't there. No, you didn't do this. And that was done in this interrogation with her. About the laptop, that he always kept it in a bag. She says, he loaned it to me for school. Did he loan it to her or she stole it? After she bludgeoned him to death. She stole the laptop, stole also his tapes, put the picture down on the bedside table of the girlfriend, Miss Kathy. See, so much to this story. There was the one lady that they considered the girlfriend, Kathy Collins, long-haired beauty. They assuming she was the main line, but he still slept around with other women. And the picture of Kathy was face down on the nightstand when the body was discovered by the mother and the detectives. And Dionne was a student and worked for Marta, but also married at the time. Then there was Caraway, another black female who worked for Mr. Lance. Then there was a business associate who also could have been a suspect. But everything kept pointing back to Miss Dionne Baugh in the eyes of the detectives. Hair, skin found in the bed. Very interesting information, I must admit. Very interesting information. Five head hairs. Two believed to be of belonging to Miss Dionne. Three belonging to the victim. So it is said in this commentary that he was meticulous. Why would he have her DNA skin under his nails? Well, the only thing you could think of is if he was scratching her at one point and or he was having sexual relations with her. So one could believe that he was having sexual relations with her before death because they're putting the timeline at between 12 a.m. and 4:10 a.m. because that's the time that The clock stopped inside of the bedroom. 3 clocks. Somebody stopped them. Now, who would do that? And what are the odds of 3 clocks in a room stopping at the same time? 2 hairs didn't match Dionne's that were found in the bed. 3 pubic hairs were found that didn't belong to Dionne Baugh. Very interesting information. Interesting that DNA and forensics can tell the difference between head hair and pubic hair. Wow. Never gave much thought. I guess I had no reason to, but very interesting. A crescent wrench is believed to be the murder weapon, and it is said that he had just used it recently, a wrench to put together exercise equipment. Where was the wrench at the time for her to go get it without his knowledge? And once again, why did Miss Baugh kill this man? I think it's interesting. When she took the plea, she didn't tell why. And then there was a little shakeup during the first trial with the prosecutor not paying administration fees. And then the defense wanted to have the trial dismissed because he wasn't in good standing with the bar at the beginning of the trial. But that was rectified during trial 1, and the judge let the guilty verdict stand. So fast forward a little while later, a second trial comes about. Trial number 2, 7 years later to be exact. All-star players defending Miss Baugh. Jury deadlocked during trial number 2. And a mistrial was declared by the judge. Wonder why the second time was there a mistrial? It is said in this commentary that with this all-star team, they put on a character assassination of the victim. And sometimes it can happen during a trial that the victim becomes public enemy number 1. And that is the point of being a defense attorney, is to get your client off, or perhaps a better deal, if indeed they killed the victim. So I believe that's what happened in trial number 2 that led to the jury being deadlocked. They threw out the victim's MO, sleeping around with different women, bedding different women, being married 3 times, last marriage on the rocks from infidelity. Different women coming in and out of Mr. Lance's house. He's lavishing them with gifts and trips. As I said, Miss Kathy is the one they believe was the main one, but you see he hooked up with this young lady who's a student and also married with a child. She didn't care. She obviously wanted him, but she probably realized she couldn't have him because he was a male whore. Call a spade a spade. He was a whorish man. It's possibly why he was married 3 times. He liked the company of women and couldn't keep his wee-wee in his pants. And his wee-wee, I believe, is what got him dead. Now, this woman was wrong for sleeping with him. Let's call a spade too, on her part. She was also a married woman, so she had no business sleeping with the victim. She should have divorced her husband and went on her merry way. So everybody is guilty for philandering around. But she had no right to kill him. And as you see and heard, rather, that there were a lot of suspects. So they didn't know who to think the police did this. He had a lot of money. He was in debt. In other commentary you will hear on the Oxygen Network, at least $500,000 in debt, credit card debt. Spending beyond his means, lavishing this woman with gifts. Bought her a car, a Mercedes, but later asked for it back. Asked for his credit card back from Miss Dionne Baugh. So you know at this point she's probably livid. What? You want to take my car back? You want to take the credit card back? Why are you taking back things that you gave me? Was that the motive? Because she had to return the credit card in the car? Wouldn't go to court the next day or drop the charges against her? Because you always have to ask yourself the obvious question. How did Miss Baugh get into the house to bludgeon him? The garage door was half up. Not half up, but a little ways up from the ground. Did she maneuver her way under the door? She's a petite person. She could have easily just got on her stomach back and eased up under that gate, that garage door, and made her way in while he slept. Because it was, I'd say, a few inches to a foot up off the ground where a smaller person could have slid up under there and entered into his house. Or did he invite her over? But the interesting part is that they knew she was lying to the detectives, and they confronted her on that. And she also had possession of his laptop without the case. And people have known him to carry his laptop all the time in the case because he was meticulous. And the fact that there were different bed hairs in the bed, is also up for questioning. Because one could say, well, her hair is expected to be in the bed because they had sex that night. But then when you factor in other pubic hairs, as I just brought you information, they were found in the bed. Let me go back to my notes. 3 pubic hairs that were not identified as Dionne Baugh. 2 of the head hairs did not match Dionne Baugh. So you got 2 head hairs that don't match her and 3 pubic hairs that didn't match her in the bed. But 3 head hairs were found in the bed that belonged to the victim. So one would have to say he wasn't as clean possibly as he was made out to be as far as washing his hands all the time. Perhaps Mr. Lance washed his hands a lot, but not his sheets. Stay woke. How many women had been in that bed before his death? It's a very interesting question. And perhaps Miss Baugh had been peeping around a little more than the one time she saw the other woman through the window. You see, the one thing I've learned about true crime and interrogation, people don't tell everything about what they've been doing and what they've been saying pertaining to a person and their relationship with him. But the fact that the second appeal, the case was appealed 7 years later, jury was deadlocked, and I do believe it's because of the character assassination that the defense brought pertaining to the victim. She went ahead and took a plea that was offered by the prosecution. And I think they realized once it was deadlocked, this trial on appeal, might as well go ahead and offer her a plea. And she took it. So after 8 years of this wrangling with the court system about the death of this man, Dionne Baugh took a plea for manslaughter and received 10 years in penitentiary and was released in 2011. Very interesting. Very interesting story. But as I was saying with the interrogation, people don't tell everything because a lot of people get hung up on what was said during interrogation. I really want to make this clear before I check out of here. As I brought commentary with the Chris Watts story the other night and what was said by his ex-girlfriend, mistress, however you want to word it. You can't believe everything that people say in interrogation because this case is a prime example. Who's to say she didn't know that he had been messing with a lot of women? They asked her that, Ms. Baugh, and she says, I don't know about a lot of women, several women. I just know the one time I saw him inside his house with another woman. Well, use common sense. If she knocked once, she's probably knocked twice. So she may have knocked some other times and saw him in there with somebody else. Who's to say? Maybe that's that one time he decided to call the police. Maybe she'd been by there several times and he had company. He didn't let her in. And this the one night she just kept going on and on, banging, cussing. He went on and called the police. See, you never know because the dead can't talk, and she's not going to tell you in an interrogation room, yeah, I've been going by there every night, peeping through the windows, peeping through the doors, because she's talking about a dead man. And how would that look if she was to say in an interrogation room, yeah, I've been going by, peeping and watching the driveway to see who's there, whose car's parked there, yeah. She had to play the role like she didn't know he had been messing around with lots of women, giggling and laughing and talking about she wished she had looked better. As I said, very inappropriate talk when you're being asked questions about a man you've been laying with who's now dead. Too giggly for my taste. So that told me a lot of her behavior. That she was a sociopath, like all the other suspects that have killed people. A lot of killers are sociopaths. She was tooting her own horn in that interrogation room. She was giggling and putting on for those detectives who happen to be men. Stay woke, because she likes men. She probably thought she was a dime piece, could sway them in there, talk around the subject, because many suspects do this, try to paint a narrative and dodge the important questions. But they already knew, because they had gotten information from his staff, outsiders, checked his home, phone logs, so they knew where to take the investigation. And everything led back to Dionne Baugh. Where is Dionne Baugh? Commentary I brought you today says possibly she's lived in Florida. I believe it said Kansas. Then it says Georgia. So where is she? Why has she been low key? Why has she not spoken out about taking that plea? She's been released, 11 years now? Why did she take the plea? Did she say to herself, I don't want to keep doing this, going before these 12 members of juries? I'll just go on and take a plea and be done with it. I know I killed this man. Let me end this. And naturally, his mother was happy. Put an end to it. Probably not true justice in her eyes, because her child was killed. As you heard on the 911 call, she told the dispatch, this is my baby. But her baby was a whore. A 41-year-old male whore who had a 4-year-old child at the time of his death. Where is that son now? What does he think of his father? What happened to him? What did the mother think finding her son bludgeoned to death? What did she think when she found out this woman had killed her son? Did the mother know that her son liked to sleep around with different women? Did she uphold her son sleeping around with different women in his marriages? Stay woke. You see, he chose a wicked path, Mr. Lance. Now, it is not to say that he deserved death and murder, but bad business deals, owing people money, sleeping around with different women, sleeping around with women while married, this story could have went a multitude of ways and a multitude of suspects, which it had. Could have been a business partner that killed him, want their money. Could have been a wife that killed him, upset and angry because you're violating her, disrespecting her. You've betrayed her. And the defense attorneys were right. Could have been any other woman that brought down the blows to Mr. Lance. But as I said, all roads led back to Dionne Baugh. And where is she? Does she still live in the state of Georgia? Is she in the metro Atlanta area? Does she have a relationship with her daughter? What name is she using? Will she hear this live? Possibly. And why hasn't she come forward to discuss her motives for killing Lance Herndon? Does she have any regrets for killing him? Does she have any remorse for killing him? Does she feel justified in killing him? And once again, why did she kill Lance Herndon? And is she remorseful for killing Lance Herndon? And how does the last wife feel about the death of her husband? What about the other wives? How do they feel knowing the man that they were married to who possibly wasn't a good husband if he was philandering around, how do they feel knowing the man that they were married to was bludgeoned to death in his own bed? The cops say it was personal, but we have learned that people will kill you, stab you multiple times, and don't know you. Beat you to death multiple times and don't know you. Because you see, you're trying to put logic behind the crime when there is no logic. Everything depends on the suspect, his or her mood, and how they want to exact the crime. It is a sad way to go, to be murdered by someone else, and especially someone that you know, someone else that you have laid with, slumbered with, shared a life with, or coexisted with, had some type of personal dealings with. Lance Herndon is a cautionary tale of why you should try to live right and do right by people. Because you do not want to wake up being beat to death. Because that would be terrible to see it coming. I don't know if he saw it coming, but he didn't make it, which leads me to believe he was asleep at the time of his brutal death. You cannot go out here doing malicious things to people, hurting people, betraying people, because somebody may not take it as well as the person across the street or around the corner. Some people will still show you favor and deal with you. Some people will forgive you and still deal with you, and then some will forgive you and keep it moving. And then there is the ultimate, the person who will hold a grudge and lie in wait to kill you. And that is what Dionne Baugh did in August of 1996. Premeditated? I do not know. Crime of passion? I do not know. But I do believe she got wind that things were not going in her favor with Mr. Herndon. And she killed him brutally in his bed. Will Dionne Baugh ever speak about her time with Lance Herndon? And will she ever come forward to the public and reveal why she killed Lance Herndon? And does she have remorse for killing Lance Herndon? Thank you all so much for joining me. This is Crime Vault, an extension of Everyday Shenanigans. If you'd like to donate to the channel, $Big Angie, 129 Cash App. You all have a blessed day, and I will talk to you later. Thank you for your time.